The Tuesday after Thanksgiving, I called my financial advisor and said 4 words: start the transfer. Everything. She paused on the line. Are you sure, Elaine? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. That's where I'll start. But to understand why I said that, you need to go back about 6 weeks earlier to a backyard in Oakville, Ontario, on a warm Saturday in October when my daughter-in-law stood in front of 40 people and laughed at me. I've been a seamstress for 31 years, not a fashion designer, not a boutique owner, a seamstress. I worked out of a small shop on Spears Road, the kind of place most people drive past without noticing. The sign on the door was hand-painted. The bell above the entrance hadn't worked properly since 2009. I fixed wedding dresses, let out trouser waists, hemmed curtains, replaced zippers on winter coats. Honest work. Repetitive work. Work that leaves your fingers slightly calloused and your back stiff by Thursday afternoon. My son knew this. He grew up watching me at the sewing table after school, watching me measure and pin and press. He knew what I drove. A 2012 Civic that needed a new muffler every other winter. He knew where I lived, a 2-bedroom bungalow in East Hamilton that I bought in 1998 and kept very, very quiet about. What he didn't know, what almost nobody knew, was what I had been doing with my money for the past 3 decades. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My son's name is Callum. Wait, no, I keep doing that. His name is Reed. Reed is 41 years old. He's a project manager at a construction firm in Mississauga, and he married a woman named Tessa 4 years ago. Tessa came from a family in Oakville, old Oakville money, the kind that shows itself in the way people set a table and the particular way they say the word cottage, always with the emphasis on the first syllable, always with a slight pause after, like they're waiting for you to ask which one. I tried with Tessa. I genuinely did. I brought wine to dinners. I admired their house. I learned to say the right things about the right neighborhoods. But Tessa had a way of looking at me, not unkind exactly, more like I was a math problem she'd already solved and found uninteresting. She was polite, politely distant, politely dismissive. I noticed, but I told myself it didn't matter. Reed was happy. That was enough. Then came my grandson's graduation party. My grandson, Reed's stepson from a previous relationship, a boy I have loved since he was 7 years old, graduated from his nursing program at Mohawk College last September. His name is Owen. He's 24, careful with his words, kind in the way that people are when they've had to be kind, because nobody was going to do it for them. I've always adored Owen. I used to take him to Tim Hortons on Saturday mornings when he was small. I let him sit on the stool beside my sewing table and pick out buttons. So when Tessa announced they were throwing Owen a graduation party in their backyard in Oakville, I was happy. I started thinking about a gift. I had something specific in mind. 15 years ago, before Reed and Tessa, back when Owen's mother was still in the picture and Owen was just a quiet little boy who collected hockey cards, I had opened a registered education savings account in his name, Spark. I added to it every year, not enormous amounts, but steady. When it became clear he wasn't going to use it for university, when he took a few years to figure himself out before choosing nursing, I converted it into a non-registered investment account and kept contributing. I didn't tell Reed. I didn't tell Owen. I just kept putting money in every January like clockwork. By September, that account had grown to just over $34,000. I had a financial gift card printed. Not a check, just a printed card from the brokerage with the account summary and a handwritten note explaining that I was transferring it all into his name. I tucked it into a cream envelope. I wrapped it plainly. No bow, no tissue paper. I am not a bow-and tissue paper kind of person. The party was lovely, honestly. Tessa has good taste in outdoor furniture. There were about 40 people in the backyard. Her parents, her friends, Reed's work colleagues, a few of Owen's nursing school classmates. There was a catering spread. There was a custom cake. I sat beside an older woman I didn't know and had a perfectly pleasant conversation about the weather patterns that autumn. After dinner, Owen opened his gifts. He went around the table. Gift cards from friends. A new watch from Tessa's parents, the kind of watch that comes in a box with its own pillow, a weekend trip from Reed and Tessa. Then he got to mine. He opened the envelope carefully. He unfolded the paper. He read it. His expression shifted, quiet surprise, a little disbelief. Before he could say anything, Tessa leaned over and glanced at the paper. I saw her read it. I watched her face change, but not the way Owen's had. Her lips pressed together. She looked at her mother across the table, and then she said, loudly enough that the conversation nearby paused, "An investment account? She's been putting in what, $40 a month?" Her mother made a sound, a small, amused sound, the kind that doesn't commit to a laugh but lands exactly like one. Reed looked up. He looked at Tessa. He looked at me. He shrugged. That's the part I can't shake, even now. Not the laugh. Not Tessa's words. It was that Reed looked right at me, registered what had just happened, and shrugged, like he'd decided, somewhere along the way, that it was easier to be on her side than on mine. Owen said, "Gran, thank you. This is." But the moment had already passed. Tessa had turned to say something to the person beside her. Reed had picked up his wineglass. The table had moved on. I folded my hands in my lap. I smiled when anyone looked at me. I ate the rest of my meal. When it was time to leave, I hugged Owen. He held on a second longer than usual. He said quietly, "I don't care what she said. This is the most real thing anyone has ever given me." I drove home to Hamilton on the 403. I didn't turn on the radio. I just drove. Here is what nobody at that party knew about me. In 1994, after my husband passed away, Reed was 12. The insurance payout was modest. The mortgage on the bungalow was real. I sat down with a woman at a TD branch on King Street East and asked her what I should do with $47,000. She asked me a lot of questions. She recommended a balanced portfolio. She was patient with me. I went home and thought about it for a week, then I called her back and said yes. I kept going back to that branch every year. I added what I could. Not always much. Some years almost nothing. But I added. I read the statements. I asked questions. I took a continuing education course at McMaster on personal finance in 2001 because I didn't understand what my advisor meant by rebalancing. I took it again in 2003 because I still wasn't sure. I bought a rental property in 2002, a small duplex in East Hamilton, because a customer at my shop mentioned her brother was selling and the price was below market. I did not tell anyone I was doing this. I used a property management company so my name didn't appear in obvious places. I paid it off in 11 years. In 2008, when the market dropped and everyone I knew was panicking, my advisor called me and I told her to hold. She said, "You're sure?" I said, "I have 30 years of runway. Hold." She held. By last September, the September of the graduation party, my total net worth, between the investment portfolios, the property, and the bungalow itself, was just over $2.1 million. I am 67 years old. I live in the bungalow I bought in 1998. I drive a 2019 RAV4 now, which is the most expensive vehicle I have ever owned, and I felt guilty about it for the first 6 months. I clip coupons from the Dollarama flyer not because I have to, but because it is a habit that kept me alive financially for 30 years, and I am not about to stop now. Nobody at that party could have known any of this. That is, as I think about it, entirely my fault. I had made myself invisible on purpose. I had chosen a life that didn't announce itself. I just hadn't expected that my own son would be standing in that backyard, watching someone mock me, and choosing to say nothing. I drove home. I slept. I got up Sunday morning and made oatmeal with maple syrup, and I thought about it very carefully, the way I think about everything. By Monday, I had made 3 decisions. The first was about my will. I have a will that I update every 3 years with a lawyer named Mr. Desjardins, who works out of a small office in Stony Creek and who has known me long enough to stop being surprised by anything I do. I called him Monday morning and told him I needed an appointment as soon as possible. The second was about Reed. My son and I speak on the phone every Sunday at 11. I decided I would stop calling. Not dramatically, not with an announcement. Just stop. If he called me, I would answer. If he didn't notice, that would tell me something. The third was about the money I had planned to give Reed and Tessa. I should explain that. When Reed and Tessa bought their house in Oakville 4 years ago, the mortgage was significant. I had quietly decided, Reed didn't know this, Tessa certainly didn't, that when I died, the bulk of my estate was going to Reed. He was my only child. That had always been the plan. But sitting at my kitchen table on Monday morning, eating oatmeal and thinking about that shrug, I started to wonder whether the plan I had made was the right one. And then I started to wonder whether the person I had made it for was the person I had made it for was the person I thought he was. The appointment with Mr. Desjardins was Thursday afternoon. I walked him through what I wanted. I watched him take notes without reacting because he is excellent at his job. When I was finished, he said, "This is a significant change." "I know," I said. "You've thought about it since Sunday morning." He nodded. He said he'd have a draft ready in 10 days. I said that was fine. I walked out into the parking lot on a cold October afternoon and felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not relief exactly. Something quieter than that. Like setting down a bag I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. 4 weeks passed. Reed called once. 3 weeks after the party. He didn't mention the party. He asked how I was. He told me about a project at work, he said. Tessa sent her regards. I said all the right things. I did not tell him anything. Owen called the week after the party and left a voicemail. He said he'd looked up the account and he understood what it was and he wanted me to know that it meant everything to him. He said he was going to use part of it to pay off his student line of credit and keep the rest as an emergency fund. He said he had bragged about his grant to his nursing classmates. I sat in my living room and listened to that voicemail twice. Then, in late November, Tessa's parents had a problem. I didn't know about it until Reed called me on a Sunday, not our usual time, a different Sunday, mid-afternoon. He sounded strange, careful. He said, "Mom, I need to ask you something." I said, "Go ahead. Tessa's dad is having some financial trouble. It's a tax thing. The CRA is auditing some of his business accounts. It might get complicated." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. "The thing is," Reed said, and his voice dropped a register, "they're probably going to need some liquidity in the next few months while things get sorted. And I was wondering, I know you have some savings, whether you might be able to help." There it was. I want to be careful here about how I tell this part, because it would be easy to make myself the hero and Reed the villain, and the truth is more complicated than that. Reed is my son. He loves me, I think, in the limited way that adults who have been careless with their parents love them. Not meanly, but without full attention. He asked because he was stressed and because he thought of me as a resource. And he thought of me as a resource partly because I had always made myself available as one. But I thought about the shrug. I thought about the sound Tessa's mother had made. And I thought about the version of me I had been at that party, sitting quietly with my folded hands while people laughed. And I thought, not this time. "Reed," I said, "I need to tell you something." "Okay. I need to tell you what I actually have." There was a pause. "What do you mean?" So I told him. Not everything at once. I let it come out slowly, the way it had been built slowly, piece by piece, over 30 years. The portfolios, the duplex, the TFSA that was maxed every January, the net worth number. I told him all of it. The silence on the phone was very long. Finally, Reed said, "Mom, why didn't you ever?" "Because it wasn't relevant," I said, "until someone at a party laughed at me for giving your son $34,000. Another silence. "I didn't," he started. "You shrugged," I said. "You looked right at me and you shrugged." I heard him exhale. "I'm not calling to punish you," I said, and I meant it. "I'm calling because you asked me for money and you deserve to understand why the answer is no. The answer is not because I don't have it. The answer is because I have spent the last month thinking about what I want the rest of my life to look like. And I have decided that I am going to stop making myself small so that other people are comfortable around me." Reed was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Mom, I'm sorry." about the party. I should have said something. Yes, I said, you should have. The Tuesday after Thanksgiving, the Canadian one, October, I called my financial advisor and told her to start the transfer. I moved a significant amount into a new account structure that my lawyer and I had spent 2 weeks designing. The short version, Owen was named a direct beneficiary of a trust. Tessa's name, which had appeared in my previous will in the context of Reed's share, no longer appeared anywhere. Reed was not cut out entirely. I want to be clear about that. He is my son, and I am not a person who operates from cruelty. But the structure changed, the conditions changed, and the assumption that my money would flow quietly and automatically toward people who had never once thought to ask where it came from, that assumption was gone. As for Tessa's father's tax situation, I read about it later in a roundabout way. The CRA audit was real. The business had some irregularities in HST filings going back several years. It was, by all accounts, an unpleasant process that cost the family a significant amount in penalties and professional fees. I don't know the details, and it's not my business to know them. I will say only that I did not help, and I did not feel guilty about not helping. The last Sunday in November, Owen drove down from Hamilton. He moved there for work, which I found quietly delightful, and we went to Tim Hortons, the same one we used to go to when he was small. We got Timbits and double-doubles and sat in a booth by the window while the first real snow of the season came down outside. He said, "Gran, can I ask you something weird?" I said, "You can always ask me something weird." He said, "Did you always know you were going to be okay? Financially? Even when Dad and I were little and things were tight?" I thought about that for a moment. I thought about the TD branch on King Street in 1994. I thought about the woman who asked me all those questions and waited while I figured out the answers. "No," I said. "I didn't know. I just decided to act like I was gonna be, and then I kept deciding that every year for 30 years. He nodded. He ate a Timbit. "I want to be like that," he said. "You already are," I told him. "You just don't know it yet." Reed and I are still in contact. We speak on Sundays, still. Not always at 11, not always for long, but we speak. Something between us is different now. Not broken, but changed. Recalibrated, maybe. He knows now that I am not what he thought I was, and I know now that he is not entirely what I hoped he would be. I think that is an honest place to start from. I think honesty, even late, is worth something. Last month I listed the bungalow, not because I had to, because I wanted to. I found a condo on the Niagara Escarpment with a view of the valley and a kitchen that gets afternoon light. The building has heated underground parking, which at 67 years old, I will not pretend is unimportant. There is a little room off the second bedroom where I am going to put my sewing table. Not because I need to work anymore, because I want to. The pipes don't rattle. I don't need them to. If you've listened this far, here is the only thing I want you to take away from this. I was never hiding. I was just living quietly the way a lot of people do, paying attention, being careful, building something slow and out of sight. The mistake I made was believing that living quietly meant I had to accept being treated as though I was nothing. Those are not the same thing. You can be understated and still have standards. You can be private and still have limits. You can love someone, your child, your son, the person you made a life around, and still look them in the eye and say, "That was wrong and I am not going to pretend it wasn't." It is not too late to say that. It is not too late to act on it. It was not too late for me. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately. Not in any grand cosmic sense, just the plain, practical kind. The kind where you look back at a sequence of events and you can trace exactly how one thing led to the next, like following a thread back through a piece of fabric to find where it started to pull loose. Tessa laughed at me in front of 40 people. Reed shrugged. Owen held on a second longer when we hugged goodbye. Those 3 moments, 30 seconds of a Saturday evening in Oakville, set everything else in motion. Not because I decided to punish anyone, but because those 30 seconds finally made me honest with myself about something I had been avoiding for years. I'd made myself invisible on purpose, and I had told myself it was wisdom. Living quietly, spending carefully, never drawing attention to what I had built. I thought that was a kind of integrity, and maybe it was for a long time. But somewhere along the way, living quietly had become something else. It had become a habit of making myself small, of sitting with my hands folded in my lap while someone laughed, and smiling when people looked over, and driving home in silence because it was easier than saying, "That was wrong." The thing about shrinking yourself to fit other people's expectations is that it doesn't actually protect you. It just teaches the people around you that you'll accept whatever they give. Reed didn't shrug because he was a cruel person. He shrugged because, for years, I had shown him that I would absorb that kind of carelessness without consequence. That was on me. That was a thing I had to sit with honestly before I could do anything useful about it. What I did after, the call to Mr. Desjardins, the restructured will, the conversation with Reed where I finally said what I had never said before, none of that came from anger. It came from clarity. There's a difference. Anger wants the other person to feel bad. Clarity just wants things to be true. I wanted Reed to understand who I actually was, not who he had assumed I was. I wanted that conversation to happen while we were both still alive to have it, not as a surprise he discovered from a document after I was gone. That's the part I keep coming back to. Intelligence. Real intelligence, the kind that actually serves you, isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's about being honest enough to look at your own patterns and ask whether they're still working. I had built something significant over 30 years by paying attention and being disciplined and asking questions when I didn't understand. But I hadn't applied that same discipline to how I let people treat me. That was a gap, a real one. Owen used part of the account to pay off his student line of credit. He called to tell me, and he sounded the way people sound when they've done something responsible and are quietly proud of it. That call meant more to me than I expected, because Owen didn't grow up with money around him. He grew up watching adults make hard choices and learning to be careful on his own. He had to build his character the same way I built my savings, slowly, without much recognition, one small decision at a time. That kind of person, I trust. That kind of person has earned something that no inheritance can give and no shrug can take away. I'm not telling this story because it ended perfectly. Reed and I are still finding our way back to something honest. Tessa and I are cordial in the way that people are when they've both understood, without saying it directly, that the dynamic has changed. These things take time, I know that. But I moved into the condo on the escarpment last month. The kitchen gets afternoon light. The parking is heated. My sewing table is in the little room off the second bedroom, and I sit there some mornings with coffee, and I look out at the valley and I think, this is what I built. This is what 30 years of paying attention looks like. It doesn't rattle. It doesn't apologize for existing. And neither anymore do I.